let's talk about death. Okay, I know this is a morbid topic. We don't like talking about death. Of course, who wants to go in that area? But you see, I feel that this is something very essential because without questioning death, we cannot actually know what life is. And let me begin with a quote from Sri Ramana Maharishi on death. Let's see what he says. So he says, if a man considers that he is born, he cannot avoid the fear of death. Let him find out if he has been born or if the self has any birth. He will discover that the self always exists, that the body that is born resolves itself into the thought, and that the emergence of thought is the root of all mischief. Find from where thoughts emerge. Then you will be able to abide in the ever present innermost self and be free from the idea of birth or the fear of death. So, there's one thing here that when Ramana Maharishi says man, that's a translation. And most probably he's identifying with his own gender, but in this case, what he means is he means to imply gender neutrality. So it's not about a man per se, like it can be both man and woman or any other gender. And the self that he refers to here is not the personal self, the sense of personal identification. By self here, which is the self which starts with the capital S, he refers to the source or the supreme reality. And now, if you see carefully, that we can feel that something came into existence. It's quite obvious that the body came into existence. Of course, the mind, as we know it, also came into existence. So anything that is acquired cannot last permanently. Whatever is acquired has to go. A lot of people say that don't run after material wealth because you can't take it to heaven. Now, whether it is right or wrong to acquire material wealth or not, to run after it or not, that is not my concern. That I leave it to you. Different people are going to have different interpretation about it. Some people say that even if you can't take it to heaven, but still you can enjoy earthly pleasures here. If that is what you think pleasure is, then it's totally up to you. So we are not getting into that question. But the fact is that, of course, even the knowledge that is acquired is going to go away. But something remains. And the whole idea of spiritual inquiry is to investigate into that. What is it that remains? And of course, from what I've seen, that thinking about this generally does not help. Because thought always conforms to a pattern. It usually ends up, concluding what it already aligns with, the belief that it already aligns with. So if you have been conditioned to believe in afterlife or concept of 7 heavens or 7 hells, whatever it may be, then your thought process is going to work in that manner. So what you will imagine is that there is an entity that dies, the physical body dies, but there is something that survives, and that goes on to different heavens, and then there is different learning, mechanisms, different learning in different realms, and so on. And maybe that is true. We really don't know. But for the sake of simplicity and based on personal experience, let's say that everything that is acquired dies. But what is that which is not acquired? That was always there. And of course, memory cannot help in that, because memory is not very reliable. You see, you can't recall what you had for lunch a couple of days back. So how can you rely on memory when it comes to the time of your birth or what was there before birth? You see, we experience a sort of death every day when we go into deep sleep. That is one free sample that God, God, or call it universe, whatever you like, provides us. The consciousness, I think consciousness is a better word than God. So the consciousness provides us that experience of maybe 1.5 hours of deep sleep, where there's completely blank, complete emptiness. There's no you, there are no worries, there's nothing at all. Complete peace, complete silence. There's no experience of even time flowing in that. The Mandukya Upanishad calls it Sushupti, the state of deep sleep. And it is very true that if we don't get that deep sleep, that small period of deep rest, then we don't function very well in our waking state. So that is that comes after the REM sleep, which is the dream sleep. So all these are very important. The REM sleep is also important, and deep sleep is also very important. Because if you don't get REM sleep, then your mind starts projecting dreams in the waking state. There is some sort of scientific analysis also about this. I'm not very knowledgeable about that, but you can look it up on the internet. So the idea is that all that integrated and formed this structure will eventually disintegrate and dissolve. And while our whole life effort is to preserve this entity, now see, preservation of body, keeping good health, I'm not talking about that. That is perfectly okay. But there is this entity that obsessively worries about the physical health, the psychological health, that obsessively says that I don't want to experience any kind of illness, I don't want to undergo any kind of disease, any kind of death, any kind of decay, or I don't want to die. This entity may not openly say that I don't want to die, but every fear stems from that fear of death. That is our primal fear. So whatever this entity or ego, the I thought, does, it does those things from that perspective, that it wants itself to survive. But the problem is, the paradox is that there is no such thing as the ego. The I thought itself is an illusion, and that is what Ramana Maharishi says here. That once you look deep and remain with this I thought, what you realize is that it does not have solidity. So when it doesn't flow outwards, what happens is that it turns inward. And when it turns inwards, something very amazing happens. Now, this is again a bit conceptual, but It's not exactly the way it is, but I can't explain better than this. Something which was in the foreground, something which was in the background comes into the foreground. Something which cannot be described other than the pure awareness. And the sense of I thought, the sense of I or me, which was in the foreground, it goes back into the background. So after this shift in perception, there is a very different quality to this I thought. It still operates, it still comes up in daily living, but there is a very different quality to it. The actions then come from intelligence. They are spontaneous. Of course, there is no distinction, so as to speak, between the I thought and the pure awareness, because all there is pure awareness, and that is what Ramana Maharishi here calls the self with the capital S. So he says that this I thought is the root of all mischief. This phantom entity, the I thought, which propagates as me in the horizontal time, is actually the bane of our existence. The me is the thinking mind that brings about suffering in horizontal time. And once this me dissolves, that is what is implied by death here. The dissolution of me, the restoration of this I thought or me into its very basic form, where it remains only concerned with day-to-day functioning and not with what should or should be. So the disintegration is only of that which integrated. But that which was unborn cannot die. And I think I will conclude with another quote from Ramana Maharishi, where he says, the state of liberated being can be reached out only by dying. But this dying does not consist in destruction of the body. One should understand that true death is the extinction of the ideas I and mine. You see, the entire flow of this personal entity me is based on the ego structures of I, me, and mine. My story, what happened to me, what will happen to me. This is mine, that is not mine. I want this, I don't want that. Our whole life is based on these common structures. And this is what creates suffering in life, because it brings up ideas like things should be a particular way, the way I like them, the way I want them. They should not happen the way I don't want them. So if you carefully examine, all your life happening has been happening within these structures, the ego structures. And once the nature of this I thought is understood, it dies its most natural death. And the paradox is that it does not require any effort to realize this. Of course, one may put effort as a part of seeking, but eventually the I dies when the futility of effort is seen, when the futility of thought is seen. You cannot think and kill the I thought, because thinking and I thought is the same. The I thought is the root of all thinking, according to Ramana Maharishi. So when the I thought is subdued, it's dissolved, and it's maintained into its very basic form, then what happens? This thinking may still arise, the sensations may still arise, but then there is nothing to propagate that into horizontal time. Therefore, the pain in the moment does not become suffering. The pain in the moment may still happen. There is no force, no power on earth that can provide relief from pain in the moment. The pain in the moment has to happen. But yes, suffering, in some cases, sometimes it may happen for some time. But when this understanding is there, when the unreality of the I thought is seen, in other words, when the death has already happened, then there is nothing to carry forward this. Because all those structures of I, me, mine, my story, this, that, it's all broken. Those structures are all dissolved with the I thought. They cannot sustain with that. So that is what is implied by death here. Death is awakening of something new. And even physical death. Why most people are afraid of physical death is because they are not scared of the unknown, what is out there. They're scared of what they're going to leave behind. All the attachments, all the things that they have acquired, everything has to be left behind. All the knowledge, all the experiences, all sensations, everything. And that is what this ego or the I thought fears, because the I thought's nature is binding. Its nature is to bind and cling. Whereas the eternal self, it never binds, it never clings. It is simply the way it is. It does not discriminate. The I thought discriminates. So it clings on to concepts. And it gives formation to this entity called me. I am so and so. I have studied this philosophy. I believe in these ideas. This is my nationality. This is my religion. This is my occupation. This is my worth. All the idea about growth, accomplishment, they are all propagated by this sense of personal identification or the I thought. And it is also true that the I thought sees the concept of death as a very morbid subject. It is always scared of dying. And yet it has the fantasy of attaining liberation. So it keeps pursuing the direction of liberation. It wants to do a lot of meditation, a lot of spiritual practices to attain liberation, to attain enlightenment. But what it fails to recognize is that enlightenment is its own demise. Enlightenment is its own dissolution. That is why ego is called unconsciousness, because it cannot see that. But when this ego is seen for the illusion it is, then it has already died its natural death. The organism, of course, is a formation, so it lives its course and finishes. It comes from nature, it goes back into the nature. But this fear of a future death, the fear of suffering and all that starts to vanish. Because the reality has seen, it's seen in the moment. It's seen that it is just here and now. There is no reality apart from here and now. And the self, the Ramana Maharishi, the self that he talks about is just here and now. It is in this very moment. And I remember listening to Osho once where someone asked him about the fear of death. Someone asked that I really fear death. And he said that if you fear death, do one thing. Go to the burial grounds and spend time there. And I believe Osho also used to do that. When you see dead people, when you see the body, dead bodies, and especially in Hindu culture, they burn the bodies, and it is, you get to see that thing, that everything eventually disintegrates. Once the life force, the essence from the body is gone, it's not the same anymore. You get to realize that. You get to realize the transitory nature of life. Of course, we don't want to go to the burial grounds, but that is true. I have been to many burial grounds. I've seen the bodies being burnt. I have held the ashes in my hands. I have held the bones also in my hands. So what I see is that it was all an accumulation, and every accumulation has to disintegrate and dissolve. That is the law of nature. The fear of death is the fear that comes from the existence of this I thought, believing in the existence of this I thought. Otherwise, there is nothing to die, because there was nothing that was born. I think we'll finish with that.